Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This is Guido Lobrano. I'm Director General for Europe at ITI, the Information Technology Industry Council. We are the global association of the technology industry. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the virtual policy discussion on the marketplace dimension of the Digital Services Act. This is a proposal, as many of you know, that was presented by the European Commission in December 2020 to address upcoming challenges in the platform economy. Today's discussion will focus in particular on e-commerce and marketplace-related aspects of the Digital Services Act, including on how industry and regulators can work together to address public policy challenges like proliferation of counterfeit and unsafe goods in order to enhance consumer protection. We plan to discuss key considerations for both the platforms and right holders, as well as possible regulatory solutions. And in order to do this, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our distinguished speakers today. So we have MEP Dita Karantsova. She's the Vice President of the European Parliament and also the coordinator in the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee for her political group, Renew Europe. And she's also the shadow rapporteur on the DSA in IMCO. I think it's well known that the digital economy is one of Ms. Karantsova's top priorities. So we are really glad that she could join us for this conversation. And together with her, we also have Stefan Krajcik. Stefan is Associate General Counsel and Head of Government Relations EMEA at eBay. Stefan joined eBay in 2009 after he worked for many years as an IT litigator. And our third speaker is Mark Payton. Mark is IT Counsel for Canon Europe. Mark has been with Canon for close to 10 years, where he helped establish Canon first online counterfeit program, and is continuing to help refine their approach to tackling counterfeits online. So I think with this lineup, we are well set to address a number of the key issues around marketplace and the right policy framework for marketplaces within the DSA. As you all know, the Digital Services Act is a very broad proposal that is aimed at presenting horizontal rules that take into account all the different business models and the complex value chain in the online platform ecosystem. And of course, among those, the marketplace dimension is a very, very relevant one. From ITI's perspective, we are very supportive of this horizontal approach, and we are following very closely the discussions in the European Parliament. We are also strong believers that some of the core pillars of the existing framework that is largely dictated by the e-commerce directive should remain in place. Elements like the country of origin and the ban on general monitoring obligations. These are all aspects that should remain. As we see the debate going on in the policy circles, we see that there are different considerations in relation to marketplaces. And this is also why we decided to focus today's discussion on the marketplace dimension. There is a lot of attention both in the Parliament and member states. And consumer protection is, of course, a very important role. And so I think, in today's discussion, we really want to explore new ways to enhance this through regulation. But it's also helpful to look at the many tools and the collaborations that companies have already established over time. And, our colleagues from Canon and eBay will tell the audience about that. And I think, as we go into the discussion, it will become very clear why we decided to put together a platform company and also a right holder and see how they work, how they see these challenges. In the Parliament, there is an ongoing discussion with various goals that are being pursued. There's a lot of attention on fundamental rights and freedom of expression, consumer protection, of course, but also, most lately, I think there are considerations emerging on privacy, regulating advertising. And so I think there are questions around, whether what is the right approach to address all of these goals, if it's the right approach to conflate all of so many goals into one initiative. So I think, we'll be very, very curious to hear from Ms. Karantsova how she thinks about all of these different angles. And then, of course, there is I think a growing trend about the possibility to have two divergent regimes for, let's say, the social media platform versus the e-commerce angle. The challenges are to a certain degree different, but of course, one would also want to see a framework that is future-proof. And so as much as possible, not looking at today's business models, but looking at the challenges and the problems that one wants to tackle, so that we want to make sure that the business models of today do not become an issue for a framework that is mostly geared towards the future. We have seen, I think, a number of reports on the main draft report from Ms. Schaldemose that is looking at a very specific way to address these challenges. So I'm sure this will be also the opportunity to start thinking about and talking about a number of these points. So without further ado, what I would like to do is stop here, give the floor to Ms. Karantsova for her initial remarks, and then turn to the other colleagues.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Really timely discussion. I will start with a short, I would say, comments on the last discussion we had in the European Parliament. As you all know, and you mentioned it, the rapporteur, Madame Schaldemose, presented her draft report, which will be actually the basis of all the discussion in the European Parliament. So let me share with you with some my preliminary comments on this draft, just to kick off the discussion. We have also seen, which is also another piece of puzzle, thanks to Politico, we have seen the French position, which will be definitely the position in the Council, but definitely also a position that will come up in the discussion in the European Parliament. So firstly, I would say that I have some understanding of the concerns raised both by the rapporteur and also by the French government. I would say that these issues, the majority of these issues, should not be dealt in the Digital Services Act. Well, we all know that within 27 days, the Commission will present the new proposal, General Product Safety Regulation, and almost everything that is asked for by the rapporteur or the French papers could be fully addressed there, and I think it would be more appropriate. We all want to fight unsafe products, and I think the General Product Safety Regulation is the right place where to address it. I repeat, many of the ideas from recalls, checking the RAPEX database, notices from safety authorities are good. But from my point of view, there should be placed in the General Product Safety Regulation, which for me is sector-specific law, and we should not put it in the general law, which is the Digital Services Act, which basically would be the base for the whole internet. Secondly, I find the text on a different liability regime for marketplaces in rapporteur's report going too far. I would say even going to an extreme. How can we make marketplaces liable for a product which they have actually never controlled? Even if a product using the marketplace's payment system, the good is shipped directly from the trader straight to the consumers, to the buyer. If a trader doesn't honor a contract, it is the trader who should be liable. Moreover, also the title says everything. The Digital Services Act. The law is designed to regulate physical goods, merely the interfaces used in the transaction. So it's not the law that is designed to regulate physical goods. The potentially illegal information is legal to the product description on the website and potentially promoting an illegal good, but it is not the good itself that the platform should be liable. Lastly, I also fear the massive number of additional requirements on traders before they are even allowed to start trading online, but also especially the risk They will take down, if they do, will mean fewer traders. Most traders are micro or small businesses, and the removal of any one product because of a notification can actually cut a huge percentage of traders' business. If a trader is suspended altogether because of a single bad product, this is the end of the business. If the rapporteur's idea of 24-hour takedown happens, I think we will see massive increase in false positions and no time to actually fix the problem before it is too late for our small European traders. So this risk means that companies will stop to sell directly to consumers. We will see even more Amazon branded products or direct sales to the platforms at an additional cost. So if the goal is to help actually our businesses to compete, I don't see how this will achieve it. I will perhaps stop here. I fully understand the issue, but I'm just afraid that we will be creating more problems that actually we will be solving with these proposals if it is the final text of the DSA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this initial thoughts. And clearly, the limited liability protections are, it's always said, the cornerstone of the digital economy, and it's very, very important that this remains the case. I'm sure that a lot of the things you said resonate very well with Stefan and eBay. So maybe I will turn to Stefan now and hear what he thinks, where eBay comes from.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Ms. Sharanzova. It will not come as a surprise that what you just said is like music to our ears. Taking a step back, I've been 25 years in government affairs in Brussels. This is the first time ever in my long career here that I would almost unconditionally embrace a Commission proposal. And indeed, what I see coming from member states and certain members of the European Parliament is turning what, in my view, is a piece of remarkably balanced draft legislation into a very imbalanced and extremely dangerous piece of legislation, if indeed all the proposed amendments that we've seen this week from the IMCO rapporteur would be adopted as is. And I think, Mrs. Sharanzova, you gave all the arguments in a nutshell that plead against this extreme form of over-regulation of one sector of the entire internet community. So taking one step back, as eBay, and I think as all players in the internal market, in the online world, we really look at the DSA to be a horizontal, future-proof piece of legislation. The more ultra-specific and ad hoc, precise new obligations for only very specific sectors are introduced in the DSA, the more or the less it becomes future-proof. And the more changing behaviors will actually force it to be changed. And we all know, considering the complexity of the DSA and how long it took to review the e-commerce directive, we can't wait for another 20 years if we get it wrong on the DSA. At the same time, in our sector, the e-commerce sector, indeed, there are other instruments like the GPSD, which are much more specific, which would also emulate other areas like copyright, where a specific copyright directive was introduced recently for that sector, for those issues. We think that approach is far more preferable. We all recognize that there is a need for a much broader spectrum of tools to protect consumers in the online environment. That is a given. We also know that those rules should be creating a regulatory level playing field where everybody is not only obliged to implement them so as to protect consumers, but they should also be drafted in a way as to make it possible, technologically feasible for every player in the market to actually put in place such measures to protect consumers. And as you rightly said, if the regulation puts the bar so high that only a handful of dominant gatekeeper platforms are able to actually implement them and be compliant, then you have the adverse effects that you kill competition in the marketplace environment because all the smaller parties will not be able to comply. And then the last point is, the more extreme the liabilities are, the more business models that are not in retail are forced to apply rules that actually apply to retail, indeed to players that have access to the goods, that are really engaged from the seller to the buyer with the entire fulfillment, etc. If you apply those rules to business models that are far more remote from the good in question, then you will create entities that for fear of being liable will be overly cautious and will have to implement general monitoring and filtering systems in order to avoid huge liability for something that they actually can't control. And I'm not sure that that is where we want to go in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. And as we were saying in the beginning, I mean, the DSA is a very horizontal proposal. I mean, it's clearly platforms are at the center of it, but the framework will affect a lot of other types of businesses. And so we here have a colleague Mark from Canon. Canon is clearly a company that has an important stake in this discussion. A lot of products are sold online through platforms, and Canon has been engaging for a long time in addressing how this whole system works. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Guido. May I first thank ITI, yourself, Guido, and Vivian for the invitation to this event. It's a great honor for me to appear on behalf of Canon with such a distinguished panel. I'm delighted to represent Canon at this event and be able to share the views which I think are held widespread by many brand owners. The Digital Services Act is a significant and extensive piece of draft law, and so we congratulate the European Commission on their efforts to engage all relevant stakeholders in the consultation and drawing up and bringing together the competing interests in this first draft. Like many, we have not fully come to terms with all the intricacies and legal implications of what would be established by the DSA regime. Our focus has been on understanding the provisions which will most likely have some effect on brand owners. And in this context, from the outset, may I say, we very much welcome the DSA's proposal, and we believe it represents a step in the right direction. Perhaps to give you some background on our position, the sentiment often expressed by brand owners is that what is illegal offline in the physical world should also be illegal in the online world. This means that in general terms, the legal response we see against the offering for sale and sale of counterfeit products by, for example, a small corner shop should be replicated in the online environment. Otherwise, we would see a double standard in the way counterfeit goods are treated in the physical world versus the online world. And consequently, the online environment would be at risk of becoming a refuge for counterfeiters, counterfeits, unsafe, and other illegal or illicit goods. We all have an interest in the online trading environment because as consumers, we want to be sure that the goods we buy are legal, they're safe, and they result from legal and legitimate manufacturing processes. In many ways, the internet and online shopping have become a victim of their own success. As more goods and services are traded online, so we have seen a rise in counterfeit goods being offered for sale and sold online. There may be multiple reasons for this, but I think it's generally accepted for counterfeit traders. It's easier and exposes them to far less legal risk to sell counterfeits and counterfeit goods online. This means that as the internet has matured and developed over the last 25 years, we have seen the types of criminal activity in the physical world, traditional frauds and thefts and the like, migrate to the online world. For their part, brand owners currently use the notice and takedown schemes, which are offered by online intermediaries, to report to them counterfeit listings, scam domain names, and the like. This is the principal tool that brand owners have to report counterfeit and scams. But the process of reporting, delisting, only to find that the counterfeiter seller reappears and the products reappear some months later or some days later, hours later, means that the process is very much a game of cat and mouse. So with the rise of online crime, it may be tempting for lawmakers to heavily regulate the internet. But I think it's important to recognize that any regulation of the internet, whether concerning online shopping, DNS, or web services, should merely mirror what we take for granted in the physical world. To ensure regulations do this, all stakeholders in this online environment have a part to play. The DSA is an opportunity to update what we have today and to create a more transparent, socially responsible and accountable environment where e-commerce can flourish, consumer trust in the online environment can be enhanced, and where collaboration amongst all stakeholders, online intermediaries, brand owners and consumers can be encouraged. Brand owners have a major part to play in the identification of counterfeit goods online. In practice, brand owners are really the only ones who can identify genuine goods from counterfeit goods bearing the brand. To better help brand owners, so we in turn can help online intermediaries in the delisting of counterfeit goods. We, brand owners, online intermediaries, and enforcement authorities need the tools to do this, and this is where the DSA comes in. The e-commerce directive has been in place for 20 years. It is well understood by all stakeholders and has allowed the e-commerce environment to flourish in the EU. We think a departure from its core framework may have a negative effect for all stakeholders. As a brand owner, we, however, welcome modest improvements to the e-commerce directive, which we believe the DSA achieves, to give stakeholders the tools they need to deal with the evolving problem of, for example, counterfeit goods and scams. And particularly, we welcome codification of the notice of takedown action, the implementation of Know Your Business, customer requirements, and the trusted flagger regime. And I believe we may explore some of these in the questions. I think we've already touched on them in some of the other speakers. This is our opportunity to enhance the online shopping experience, which will benefit consumers, online intermediaries, and brands alike. Thanks, Guido.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this extensive description of how you see these issues in the first place. Maybe if I may turn back to you, Ms. Kantsova, you've just heard how these companies see what they expect from the DSA, how they see the challenges, how they're already working together also on these challenges. And I think one immediate question for me is, as we see the discussion in the Parliament, from your vantage point, how much do you see the two goals and perspectives, reconciled with each other? How much you see the Parliament looking at the same issues that the companies are looking at, or where can the business community do more or help the Parliament discussion and contribute also with concrete ideas on how they do things now. If there's something that can be improved, how can MEPs also give us some ideas on how companies can improve on what they're doing?
Thank you, Guido. Yes, indeed. I think that the event like this is very important today, because we as policymakers, legislators, we need your inputs now. There are a lot of discussion coming from different parts of Europe, from different stakeholders, and unfortunately, there are divergent views on how to make the new, I would say, law in digital in Europe work. And for some, there are really high expectations, especially when it comes to DSA. Some people just feel that it could be the law that will address all the concerns we have experienced. I just had one meeting today on the question how far we should address copyright questions in the text. And I do remember during last legislation how difficult discussion we had on the copyright reform in the European Union. We are about to implement it. It has not been yet implemented in the European Union. though there are now already people and stakeholders asking for our help and to address what has not been yet implemented in this piece of legislation. I do agree with what Mark said, that we should focus especially on the illegal content. There are views that we should also address the harmful content, which would be even more challenging than discussing how to address the illegal content. Then we have, of course, and I do agree with also what Mark said, that we have the key principle of e-commerce directive that has helped really the digital environment in Europe to scale up, to work. I come from the Czech Republic, where we have a lot of successful e-business companies, and they started from the scratch as a small startup. And I really wonder if all what I have read in the rapporteur's text is implemented, whether they would be able to survive. So we need to find the right balance. Definitely, there are gaps in the legislation which we need to address, and I think that the proposal from the Commission was a very good starting point. But I would be very cautious when some people are asking to really address all the questions that are related to the internet as we know it today in Europe. Another questions that we haven't touched upon, but for me as a politician is very important, that I don't want to create European internet. I think we need to work with our like-minded countries, especially with the US. And I'm very happy that the call that came also not only from my side, but some also other colleagues from the European Parliament has been heard by the Commission, and that hopefully in the upcoming summit with the US, we will see the launch of the council dedicated especially on the digital issues. That is very important for a lot of companies, I think.
Thank you for raising that. As you can imagine, for a global association like ITI, it is very important to pay attention to convergence of regulatory regimes around the world. Indeed, the upcoming summit between Europe and the US, we hope will be an opportunity to launch the Trade and Technology Council, and more broadly, to have a systematic approach to discuss and come up with consistent ideas on how to address common challenges. You touched upon the competitiveness angle and the fact that some smaller platforms might actually be really in trouble if they had to comply with so many difficult, strict requirements as some of the proposals from the current report are suggesting. And we have a very relevant question from the audience, and this is also the opportunity to remind everyone in the audience to use the chat function to ask a question if you have something to ask. So we have a question from Samuel Laurinkari, who is from Volt. Volt is a Finnish delivery marketplace that operates already in 23 countries between Europe and Asia. And Samuel is saying, we connect brick and mortar retailers and restaurants with local customers for delivery functions, etc. And in last year, they've only received one single takedown request. But it clarifies, as a marketplace, Volt would be fully subject to far-reaching marketplace obligations and liabilities. And so he's suggesting that to avoid overregulation, concerns around cross-border sale of counterfeits and unsafe products should be best addressed through more targeted initiatives. And he's asking, the views of all of you on this. Open to any of you who want to react to this point from someone.
If I may,
Stefan,
yeah. And what I like about this intervention from Volt, which you wouldn't suspect immediately as a prime stakeholder, obviously, definitely as a stakeholder in the DSA, but not specifically on notice and takedown and fighting illegal goods. It actually shows something very important, that today almost any and all internet platform can be a marketplace. And that brings me, so you know about Facebook Marketplace, people are buying and selling stuff on Twitter, on Instagram, on WhatsApp, you name it. And soon, indeed, the Deliveroos and the Volts and the Uber Eats of this world will also be engaged in delivering goods to people or in marketplace services. So I totally agree that if we want the DSA to remain a workable horizontal piece of legislation that will be adopted within a relatively acceptable period of time, we all have an interest in keeping it the way it was proposed by the Commission, with, of course, changes that are needed to tweak it, but not to use it as a basket to just throw in everything. And then, to the extent issues have been identified, and I know there are issues, and as Mark said as well, I mean, with the growing of e-commerce, there is obviously a scaling of illegal trade via the internet. That's a logical and mathematical consequence of e-commerce becoming far more important. But that in and of itself is already a very complex issue. So in order to keep the DSA as balanced, as horizontal, as simple as possible, I totally subscribe to the idea that those very specific issues that are for specific business models need to be addressed in separate legislation, as has been done with the Copyright Directive, and as absolutely indeed the General Product Safety Directive provides a platform to do that. There is an IP Enforcement Directive that may be up for review if needed. So there are other instruments much more appropriate for this. And then people can see that if within their palette of services, like with Volt, you start as a food delivery service and in a year or two from now, you also are a marketplace, then you have a specific piece of legislation for marketplaces that will tell you what you have to do, where your liabilities are, instead of going to a huge regulation that tries to be the fit for all of any problem of today and tomorrow, which of course it can't be. So very interesting and relevant point, let's say, from both.
Maybe if I just add on.
Mark, please.
Oh, sorry, Dieter. Maybe if I just add to Stefan's remarks, I very much, I think, aligned with Stefan's view. Counterfeit goods are illegal. I mean, that's the key point. They're illegal. And the e-commerce directive has, as I said, has been established for 20 years. We all know it. All the stakeholders know it. And as brand owners, we use it to, we act under it to report notice of takedowns, and that requires effectively the platforms to take action to remove these illegal products. So, I mean, it's well understood, and as I said in my opening remarks, we don't want to move away from that structure. I think everyone knows it, everyone accepts it. The DSA, I think, as the Commission proposed it, is very much an incremental change on that. It sees where there has been issues. It has looked at where there can be improvements, and it's made some suggestions. I haven't had the benefit of looking at in detail the Mr. Schoenemoses report, so I can't really comment on that in detail. But all I would say is that and I'm sure a lot of that will come out, but I think working within the existing system with some incremental changes, I think, is an advantage to all. Just one other point on the General Product Safety Directive. All I would say on that point is illegal products being counterfeits may not necessarily be unsafe. Most of the time they will be, but sometimes they won't be. And so on that basis, I think we need to obviously have the DSA as the avenue to remove counterfeit goods, I think, which is what it has been for the last 20 years.
Ms. Kalantzova, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, definitely. Very shortly, because I think I already mentioned it at my introductory speech. But for me, I'm very happy with all these examples. So I would like to thank Samuel for bringing it up. I will actually use this argument in the discussion in the European Parliament, because my experience so far on all these digital files is that the community, the e-business community, is not heard very often in Brussels. Of course, we have the big players, they are well represented in Brussels, but then we have a lot of smaller e-commerce businesses in the member states, and they are just not aware of what we are drafting here and how it will affect their business model. So I'm very happy that also thanks to this discussion today, we made even raise more awareness among the e-commerce community, what is actually on the table, what is at stake. And I would be very happy to hear the practical examples of the companies, how it can affect their businesses.
Thanks for that. Maybe talking about practical examples, I think, in the discussion and also ITI, the organization, we've looked a lot at the different mechanisms and tools, like, the guidelines for Trusted Flaggers, which is a tool that, I think both eBay and Canon are very engaged in. So maybe would you like to tell us more about, how this is working? What do you think can be improved in the context of the USA and Trusted Flaggers?
If I may, Guido, on Trusted Flaggers is something that at eBay we've almost like invented, if I may proudly say so, with our Verified Rights Owner program, which was launched in 1998 already. So that's 23 years in practice, where rights owners actually who are registered under our Vero program are like Trusted Flaggers. And as Mark said, they are the best experts on what is or is possibly not counterfeit in their products, because of the huge variety in counterfeits, in brands, in models, etc. So that's a very precious Trusted Flagger style cooperation model that we have. In parallel, eBay works very closely with market agencies and other authorities in the area of unsafe goods and dangerous goods, and we're building tools to make the interaction with them as Trusted Flaggers as efficient as possible, all the way up to allowing them as authorities to directly take down products and to communicate directly in a wide group way with possibly affected consumers. So that allows for a very quick system. All of this is voluntarily. It's also part of what we committed to under the Product Safety Pledge. So there are already voluntary measures in place. What I understand from Mrs. Schaldemose's report is that there is this idea that voluntary measures are not good enough, because obviously they don't force everybody to do the same. So I think there is room in the DSA to create a regulatory environment whereby a certain measure of voluntary measures are actually becoming more obligatory with the necessary safeguards, obviously. We always need to think of the more we do as a platform, the more we're likely to be considered having actual knowledge of infringement, which increases our liability. And I think it's super important, if the regulator wants to encourage all players to have a minimum level of proactive and preventative measures in place, that they at the same time need to give them the confidence that if from time to time their systems don't function as well as they should, they're not immediately and automatically liable for that. So I think that is important. And I wanted to take advantage of this moment to also remind everybody that when you need to put in place new measures as an online platform, that requires building new technical tools. If a regulation that is so much in flux as the one we're looking at today means that until the day it's adopted by trialogue, by the parliament, by member states, we have 3 months to comply, I can tell you as a tech company, however talented we are and how many super engineers we have, it will be absolutely impossible technically to transpose all the obligations and tools that we would have to have in place within 3 months. So that period that is currently in the directive, in my view, is probably the one that I would criticize the most, because it disregards the time it takes to build the proper technical tools to actually be compliant. And I don't think what we want, as Mrs. Sharanzova so rightly said, so many small entrepreneurs in Europe depend on marketplaces for their business online. You don't want the eBays of this world to shut down their platform because they first need to build the tools that will take much more than 3 months. And if they don't, they're liable for everything that happens. So we need to look at that implementation period, which needs to be a lot longer than 3 months for us to allow us to adapt our systems.
And if that implementation period is a challenge for a company like eBay, you say, can only imagine what it is for a much smaller, maybe European startup platform. Let me turn to you, Mark. We started this talking about Trustworthy Flaggers.
Okay, so I think it's important to say today we work very, very closely with platforms all over the EMEA, actually, on takedown process. We work very much, you could say, symbiotically with the platforms. We need them and to help us effectively to take down counterfeit products. So we work very closely today. I don't think all the various platforms have their own systems and have sometimes additional systems, as Stefan has highlighted. I don't think there's a trusted flagger scheme quite as envisaged by Article 19 of the DSA currently. So in that way, it's quite a new concept, particularly that it's extended to brand owners and for IP infringements. I guess I see an advantage both by the trusted flaggers regime. I see an advantage both for the brand owner, because it would allow for rapid takedown of counterfeit listings, which is a benefit to the rights holder. So that we know that once we report something, it's removed rapidly, but also for the platform itself, because they're able to, if they take it down rapidly, they can put and it's done automatically, they can devote more of their resource, their people, to deal with the more complex cases, perhaps consumer complaints, for example. So a lot of that kind of work, heavy load work, can be moved to automated processes. Of course, to be a trusted flagger, you would need to qualify under a particular regime. So there would have to be some development around that. So we think very much that the trusted flagger regime, as outlined in the Commission document, very much underpins and complements I guess the mechanisms which platforms already have in place. But I think the advantage of it, having it in a regulation, is that it creates some sort of formal relationship between two stakeholders, the ISPs and the brand. And I think that can only but be to the benefit of the consumer.
Thank you, Mark. And these are all mechanisms that private companies are putting in place to help compliance with a number of ways. Now, of course, there is also another dimension for this discussion, which is the public enforcement dimension, the role of public authorities. And so I'm sure that Ms. Sharanzova, as an MEP, is also deeply interested in this angle. How can we also look at the new framework in terms of the role of public authorities?
Maybe just very briefly on the trusted flaggers from my perspective, and I was happy for Stefan's explanation, because if I would say it in very general terms, for me, there are those ones that should clean up the internet. And what is key here is that there must be experts on the content and be neutral. So that are the key elements. So they should not go after the competition, individuals, etc. There must be neutral, and there are experts. And really their role is to help to remove illegal content, and there also should not be served as a tool to seek punishment or competitive advantages. So that's very short remark on the trusted flagger. On your question on the kind of enforcement side, very difficult discussion we will have, because for me, here again, I think the key principle of the e-commerce directive, which was the country of origin principle, should stay in place. But I have question mark even with the Commission's proposal there, because on one hand, they kind of endorse it. On the other hand, if you look at the actual implementation, I'm not very sure that we will really stick to the country of origin principle. I'm all in favor that we have a cooperation, enforced even cooperation between different authorities of the member states. That this is one issue, but the proposal or ideas of some colleagues, they go even further, which would be basically that one country can enforce the other country to take down certain content. And that's very tricky and might be actually very dangerous from the political point of view, but also from the business point of view, because you can end up in 27 different regimes. And also, I personally, I don't want to be, I don't want to be taught by another member state what I should see as a content in my member state. So that would be a very difficult question, a very difficult discussion ahead of us. I would definitely advocate for the benefits of the country of origin principle, and hopefully we will find the right balance. But there are a lot of pressure to move from the current status quo.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, that will be clearly a difficult conversation, and we already see that, and we know that the council is also looking at that very, very closely. I wonder if Mark or Stefan have any thoughts on given their relationship with public authorities on the enforcement issue on the country of origin. I'm not sure if you have views on that. If you would like to say something.
As a marketplace platform, for us, it is extremely important that the country of origin principle remains in place, because that's the one guarantee that our sellers, who are obviously always nationals of a member state, feel comfortable enough to start trading online. If there would be the risk that they are faced, which there are in certain areas is anyway already the case, it would just make it so much more complex for them and therefore discourage them to start selling online if they have this constant sort of Damocles hanging over their heads that their business may be impacted by some decision in some other member state that is not aligned with what they're used to in their own jurisdiction. And it comes back and back again to the very small players who make up way over 90% of the business on eBay, but not only on eBay, on Etsy, on so many other marketplace platforms. And we've seen, by the way, during COVID, a huge uptake by people who never sold online before. They now have a business because this was their only way to survive commercially. Why would we then want to introduce a new piece of legislation that will actually set them back again to pre-COVID times? It's very contradictory. I understand where they're coming from. And I think it's more driven by, let's say, content, digital content. But still, the collateral damage will be for small European traders in the various member states.
And I guess just to complete that on the country of origin point, I think, as I said, we like the existing structures created by the e-commerce directive, so which is clear and understood by all the stakeholders. So I don't know if I can add further to that.
Thanks, Mark. The COVID, situation. it comes up in every conversation. I'm sorry to bring it up again here, but it's indeed a big factor. So I guess the question is, how is that changing the perception of the digital economy in the parliament? On the one hand, as Stefan was saying, there's a lot more e-commerce being done now, a lot more products and services being sold or enjoyed online. That maybe has also highlighted additional challenges, additional issues. So, how is that playing a role in the parliament discussion?
I'm sorry, Guido. I had some difficulties to hear your question. Could you? I did hear the beginning, but then there was some echo. I'm really sorry. Can you repeat?
No problem. I was just asking essentially, as the last couple of years, you think changed the view of MEPs in the parliament on how we need to address the challenges in the digital economy and e-commerce?
Look, it has been long-standing priority over the last, I would say, 7 years. I remember when I joined the parliament 7 years ago, we have started with this idea that we need to create a digital single market. We are far away from it, but step by step. I mean, even during the last mandate, I mentioned already the copyright reform. For instance, the free flow of data created a kind of fifth freedom of in the European Union. So step by step. When it comes to pandemia that you mentioned, definitely, and we see it on the figures. It has accelerated the e-commerce in Europe. It changed the habits of the consumers. It changed the way of living. And I think it's well reflected also on the fact, if I look from the financial point of view, that the recovery plan for Europe, we as the parliament, we were those really calling to spend more money on digital. I was hoping we can get the equal with the green agenda. We didn't get it, but almost there. So now we are encouraging the member states really to use this recovery money to help their countries, their societies to really become a more digital. That's the financial side. And then you have the legislative side. It's not the first, not the last piece of legislation that we are seeing on the digital. We have the Digital Market Act. We have artificial intelligence. I had a meeting with Commissioner Vestager yesterday on the presentation of AI. There are a lot of question marks from the industry. Again, saying maybe was this kind of, attempt of the European Union to regulate everything, whether we are not actually shooting ourselves. So we need to be very cautious. I think the idea is good to set up the rules, but rules that will be future-proof. We manage with e-commerce as the directive, which has worked for 20 years. So I'm the one saying, I don't want to fix the problem of Google and Amazon today. I want to fix the problems, the real problems that we are facing, because I want this legislation to be valid and to be to have an implication also 20 years after. And the same goes for the artificial intelligence. Again, a lot of industry is afraid what it could mean while innovating in Europe. So I think it's a good step that we are trying to be kind of the pioneer in setting up the standards, but we have to do it in the right balance, addressing issues but not killing the innovation in Europe.
And there is another question for you, Ms. Kanantova, coming from the audience, from Amelie Coulet at IBM. She's looking at the diversity of services and business models, making the example of enterprise, cloud, and B2B. And she's pointing to a growing concern that the original proposal may extend some of the requirements to types of services where it might not necessarily make sense to have for example, know your business customer measures, or other types of obligations that would not necessarily be required for consumer protection because they're not services that target consumers directly. And so she's asking whether, would you essentially agree that this could actually not address the concrete issues, but mostly affect the competitiveness of these business models?
Look, I agree with Amelie, but at the same time, I think that there are issues that we need to address. I think even industry, even businesses, they agree that the DSA proposal that was presented by the Commission was a good step. That we have issues that we need to address. But I agree with Amelie, and that's what I was trying to explain here, is that we have to take into account the business models in Europe. So I sometimes fear that people speaking about strategic digital autonomy in Europe want to create more barriers, in effect, in Europe. So we need to find a way how to make the European companies scale up in Europe and have fair internal market. And that's the simple goal that we have here. Of course, we have to take into account the shortcomings that we see in the market. But I would agree with Amelie that some of the issues, especially I would say the proposals that we see now coming from the European Parliament, go much further.
Thank you for sharing that. We have 1.5 minutes to the end. So if Mark and Stefan and Ms. Kanantova would have a very last message that you'd like to deliver now. In order, Mark first, maybe Stefan, and then Ms. Kanantova to close up.
Sure. Again, thank you very much, Guido, for giving us this opportunity. I think on certainly on the last couple of points, I very much agreed with MEP Sharanzova that there has been a move to more goods being sold online and services than ever before, and the pandemic has accelerated that. Also, of course, it has therefore encouraged bad actors and counterfeiters to move their distribution online as well. So I think this is an ideal time for this discussion, and so yeah, we welcome the draft proposal, and we look forward to engaging with stakeholders in this process.
Thank you. Stefan?
I would say let's continue to look very closely at the original European Commission proposal and try to stay as close as that balanced piece of legislation, which brings improvements across the board, with a few tweaks, I'm sure, because balanced means taking as much into account the economic interests of small European entrepreneurs who need platforms to do business. And it doesn't matter which nationality that platform has, could be European, could be anything outside the EU. They need platforms to trade online. And at the same time, let's have those relevant incremental improvements that help protect consumers, both against illegal content of any sort on social media, as well as on marketplace platforms. So never lose sight of the SMEs that so much need the internet to thrive, because they're often the unintended victim at the end of over-regulation and overprotection. And then look at the technical feasibility of what you impose on platforms and realize that they can never change their systems with the push of one button. It takes time to build new tools and new systems.
MEP Kanantova, I think we're all converging towards that final point. That the European Commission proposal is really a good start, and the Parliament can certainly improve it, but it shouldn't necessarily rewrite it completely.
And I do agree, and I hope that the European Parliament will actually change it change it in a good direction. So Guido, I would also like to thank you and also the other speakers, the panelists. I think what is important now is that we all work together, because it's not a legislation for me, it's the legislation for the European consumers, for the European business, for the e-commerce community, for everybody, and we need to get it right. Thank you.
Excellent conclusion. Thanks a lot to everyone, and we'll certainly work together. We'll certainly be in touch. ITI will be part of this discussion. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.